The night my mother told our entire family I was not okay, she stood in the middle of the living room, holding a glass of wine like she was delivering some kind of tragic announcement, her voice soft but calculated. "We're just worried about her," she said, and I watched every single person in that room nod like it made sense, like I had finally become the disappointment they'd always expected, and I didn't say a word. Not when my aunt squeezed my hand with pity, not when my cousin avoided eye contact, not even when my father added, "She's been making irrational decisions lately," because what none of them knew, what none of them could even imagine, was that just 12 hours earlier, I had signed the first document in a deal that would completely dismantle the life my parents had built on lies, and as I sat there quietly, letting them rewrite my story in real time, I realized something that made it impossible to feel hurt anymore. They weren't trying to protect me, they were trying to protect themselves from what I had already set in motion. I'm 28, married, and until a few months ago, I actually believed my parents when they said everything they did was for my own good, because growing up, they controlled everything, my college major, my job choices, even who I dated, and I didn't question it, not really, until the day I realized they weren't guiding me. They were quietly building their own lives on decisions made in my name, using my trust like it was a resource they could spend without consequences, and the worst part is, from the outside, they looked like perfect parents, supportive, successful, always talking about family first, which is exactly why no one questioned them when they started telling people I was not okay, because it fit their narrative perfectly. It gave them a reason to explain why I had suddenly stopped showing up, stopped calling, stopped playing the role they had written for me. But what no one knew was that I hadn't disappeared, I had stepped back on purpose, because the moment I uncovered what they had been hiding from me for years, I knew I couldn't confront them directly, not yet, not until I had something strong enough to make the truth undeniable. It started with something small, at least that's what I thought at the time, just a call from a number I didn't recognize while I was at work, and I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. And the man on the other end asked for me by my full legal name in a tone that felt too formal to be casual, and when I confirmed it was me, he paused before saying, "I'm calling regarding the property registered under your name," and I remember laughing a little because I thought it had to be a mistake. I didn't own any property, not even close, but then he said the address out loud, and my stomach dropped because I knew that address. It was my parents' second house, the one they always referred to as an investment, the one I was told had nothing to do with me, and I told him there had to be some confusion, but he insisted, even offered to email documentation, and when I opened the file a few minutes later, sitting there at my desk trying to act normal while my hands literally started shaking, I saw my name, my full name, listed as the primary owner, along with a signature that looked like mine but wasn't, not exactly, close enough to pass if you didn't know me, but I knew, and that was the moment everything shifted. Because suddenly all those decisions my parents made for me started to feel less like guidance and more like control, like they had been moving pieces around without ever telling me the full picture, and I didn't confront them, not that day, not even that week, because something about it didn't feel accidental, it felt planned, intentional, like there was more I wasn't seeing yet. So instead, I called my husband that night and told him everything, expecting him to be just as shocked as I was. But the way he went quiet on the phone, too quiet, made something else click into place, something I wasn't ready to fully understand yet, and when he finally spoke, he didn't say, "That's insane," or "We need to fix this," he just said, "Are you sure you're not overthinking it?" And I wish I could say I pushed harder right then, that I demanded answers, but I didn't, because a part of me still wanted to believe this was all some misunderstanding, that there was a logical explanation that didn't involve the people I trusted most deliberately going behind my back. But that illusion didn't last long, because over the next few days, more calls started coming in, about taxes, about maintenance, about decisions I was supposedly responsible for, and every single one of them pointed back to the same thing. My parents hadn't just used my name once, they had built an entire financial structure around it, and I was right at the center of it without ever knowing. At that point, I stopped trying to explain it away and started digging, quietly, carefully, because something in me knew this wasn't just about one property or one forged signature, this was bigger, and the more I uncovered, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. Accounts opened in my name, small business filings I had never signed, even a line of credit tied to an address I had never lived at. all connected back to my parents in ways that were subtle enough to avoid suspicion but obvious. Once I knew where to look, and every new discovery felt like another piece of me being rewritten without my consent, like they had taken my identity and stretched it across their entire financial life, and what made it worse was realizing how long it had been happening, because some of the documents went back years, to a time when I was still living under their roof, trusting them completely, and I remember sitting in my car one night, staring at my phone, scrolling through page after page of records, feeling this strange mix of anger and clarity, because for the first time, everything made sense. The pressure they always put on me to stay stable, the way they discouraged me from moving too far away, the constant need for control disguised as concern. It wasn't about protecting me, it was about protecting what they had built using me, and once I saw it clearly, I knew I couldn't just confront them emotionally, because they would deny it, twist it, make me look exactly the way they were already describing me to everyone else, not okay, irrational, unstable. So instead, I did something they would never expect. I went silent, completely silent. I stopped arguing, stopped questioning them directly, even played into their narrative just enough to keep them comfortable, because behind the scenes, I started working with someone who understood exactly how serious this was, someone who didn't see it as a family misunderstanding but as what it actually was: fraud, identity misuse, long-term financial manipulation, and for the first time since that phone call, I felt like I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something, piece by piece, gathering documents, verifying timelines, connecting everything into a structure that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence, and that's when the idea of the deal came into focus, not just exposing what they did, but turning it into something irreversible, something that would force the truth into the open in a way they couldn't control. And the more I worked on it, the more I realized this wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about making sure they could never do this to me again, or to anyone else. The turning point came the day I was handed a full breakdown of everything tied to my name, laid out in a way that made it impossible to look away, because until then, even with all the documents I had collected, there was still a small part of me hoping it wasn't as bad as it felt, but it was worse, so much worse. Entire financial moves made without my knowledge, debts structured to fall back on me if anything went wrong. And the most shocking part wasn't just the scale of it, it was how strategically it had been done, like they had spent years making sure everything would look legitimate if anyone ever questioned it. And I remember asking the person helping me, why would they do this? And the answer was so simple it almost made me laugh: because they trusted you wouldn't find out. And that was the moment something in me shifted permanently, because it wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was calculation. They had counted on my silence, my loyalty, my hesitation to ever challenge them, and I realized that if I confronted them now without a plan, they would win, they would control the narrative, just like they always had, which is exactly why I didn't confront them at all. Instead, I leaned in, I let them believe their version of me was working. I stopped correcting them when they hinted to relatives that I was going through something. I even let my own husband repeat it to a few people, which hurt more than I expected but also confirmed something I couldn't ignore anymore. He wasn't on my side, not fully, not when it mattered, and that realization changed how I moved next, because now it wasn't just my parents I had to outmaneuver, it was anyone who benefited from me staying quiet. So I became careful in a way I never had before, every call documented, every message saved, every detail organized, and while they were busy controlling the story publicly, I was building something privately that would do the opposite. And that's when the deal finally became real, not just an idea but a structured move, something that would legally force every hidden piece into the light, something that would connect their actions directly back to them without giving them room to deny it. And the most ironic part was, I didn't even have to create anything new, I just had to use what they had already built under my name against them, and as everything came together, I realized why they had started telling people I was not okay, because on some level, they sensed it, they felt that I was pulling away, that I wasn't playing my role anymore, and their only defense was to discredit me before I ever spoke, but they were already too late. By the time everything was ready, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the loud, emotional way they would have expected. I was focused, calm in a way that almost felt unfamiliar, because every step had been planned down to the smallest detail. And the deal itself was something they would never see coming, structured through a third party that had legally acquired interest in the assets tied to my name. Which meant that everything they had built using me was no longer under their control, not completely, and the moment it was finalized, notifications started going out automatically, legal notices, financial audits, requests for verification, each one pulling at a thread they had spent years trying to keep hidden, and I didn't call them, I didn't warn them, I just waited, because I knew exactly how it would unfold, and it didn't take long. My phone started ringing within hours, first my mother, then my father, then both of them back to back, their voices shifting from confusion to panic as they tried to understand what was happening, asking questions I didn't answer, demanding explanations I didn't owe them anymore, and for the first time in my life, I let them sit in that uncertainty, the same uncertainty they had built my entire reality on, and when I finally agreed to meet them, it wasn't at their house, it wasn't anywhere they controlled, it was in a neutral office, with everything laid out in front of them, documents they couldn't dismiss, signatures they couldn't explain away, timelines that connected every decision back to them, and I watched their expressions change in real time as the truth settled in, not just that they had been caught, but that they had lost control of the narrative completely, because there was no version of this where I looked not okay, no way to twist it into concern or misunderstanding, and when my mother tried, still, to soften it, to say, "We did what we thought was best for you," I finally spoke, calmly, clearly, and said, "No, you did what was best for you, and you used me to do it," and for once, they didn't have a response, because every excuse they had ever relied on was already dismantled, not by emotion, not by confrontation, but by the structure they thought would protect them, and as I walked out of that room, I realized something that made everything worth it. They hadn't just lost the deal, they had lost the version of me they could control. In the weeks that followed, everything they had tried to protect started collapsing exactly the way I knew it would. Audits turned into investigations, assets were frozen, and the same people who once nodded along when they called me not okay suddenly went very quiet, because the truth doesn't just come out, it rewrites everything, and the version of me they tried so hard to create didn't survive it. But what surprised me the most wasn't their downfall, it was how quickly they tried to reach out again, not with apologies, but with excuses, with half-formed explanations that still centered them as the victims, and that's when I understood something I wish I had realized years ago. Closure doesn't come from them admitting what they did, it comes from you no longer needing them to, so I didn't respond, not anymore, because I had already taken back everything they used against me, my name, my choices, my life, and the narrative they built to control me became the very thing that exposed them. So if you've ever been made to feel like you're not okay just because you don't fit someone else's version of you, remember this: sometimes the strongest move you can make is staying quiet long enough to let the truth speak for itself, and when it does, make sure you're ready to walk away, not look back, and finally live on your own terms.